As I've discussed in undoubtedly 100 different videos at this point, I believe Pixar suffers from a few problems when it comes to their storytelling style. And most of these issues I've spoken about at length and covered in other videos, and you can find a link to my Pixar Problem series in the description. But one thing that I've never really addressed about them is that they sometimes don't seem to know how to end their movies. Now, sure, some of their movies have absolutely perfect endings, such as Toy Story 3, WALL-E, or Up, but in their more recent outings, such as from the late 2010s and the early 2020s, it's become more noticeable when they didn't know how to end some of their stories while making them feel meaningful. And today, I'd like to go over a few movies that will hopefully demonstrate this point. And needless to say, since this is a video discussing endings, spoilers will abound for everything that's brought up, so in case there's something you don't want ruined, you should probably be on the lookout. This will be your one and only warning. Alright, so to start off with one of the easiest and best examples I can give, let's take a look at Cars 3. Now, personally, I believe this movie suffers from a couple of narrative issues and choices, not the least of which is that the writers obviously wanted to make this the opposite of Cars 2 to such a degree that they took it too far in the other direction, but the point is, all of this culminates in an ending that nobody certainly expected, but wasn't totally fulfilling either. Because the thing is, you'd think that since this is Lightning McQueen's movie, it would only be logical for him to be the one to beat Storm. But the writers claimed that while this was the original ending, they couldn't find a way to make it feel meaningful. And they further argued that the movie is about McQueen accepting that he's past his prime and that teaching Cruz is his true redemption. But in the end, all of that pretty much falls flat on its face. Because as I spoke about in my video on new characters, which you can also find a link in the description to, the problem here is that Lightning McQueen is the one the audience wants to see win. They want to see him overcome his struggles, because he's the one they know. He's the one they care about. So in order for the audience to truly feel that his redemption can only come through Cruz, a new character nobody cares about going in, it's the writer's job to convince them that that's the case. Now don't get me wrong here. Cruz is most definitely not a bad character. The problem mostly lies in their dynamic. Because the movie never makes it look like Cruz needs to become a racer in order to be fulfilled. Sure, she obviously has her regrets, but then again, so does everybody else. So in order for it to have the proper emotional impact when he lets her take his spot, more time should have been dedicated to how she never forgave herself for quitting and fearing that she would lose. But because most of that screen time is dedicated to McQueen's midlife crisis and trying desperately to regain his past glory instead, it not only makes it seem like the logical narrative choice that he be the one to beat Storm because his struggles are the ones that are given more focus, but the one that the audience is also going to want to see win as well because they're given every reason to sympathize and root for him. In other words, the movie sets up this idea that Lightning can redeem himself by giving Cruz the chance to redeem herself, but doesn't sell the audience on it. So when the time comes and he hands over his chance to her instead, it's apt to make the audience feel as if she's stealing his thunder, no pun intended, rather than something she's earned and needs to do. So as a result, it doesn't feel nearly as fulfilling as the writers probably thought it would, because they don't dedicate enough time to setting this ending up. Because again, the problem isn't with Cruz herself. The character could have most definitely worked as intended, exactly the way she was written. The issue is that they don't dedicate enough time to setting her problems up. Because even if you exclude the audience bias and look at it strictly from a narrative standpoint, then it still should have been Lightning McQueen who beat him. Because again, his struggles and need to prove himself are what is given the most focus and attention. And let me just say, as a writer myself, I know they could have come up with a way for him to beat Storm and have it be fulfilling if they had thought about it hard enough. Because what's important to remember is, sometimes it's not about the audience being able to predict the final outcome, but by surprising them with how the characters get to that final outcome. That makes an ending great. Maybe they could have even had Doc's ghost appear and give him the encouragement he needs at the crucial moment, in one final glorious moment of tribute to Paul Newman. Or to move on to another example of this, take Toy Story 4. Now, unlike Cars 3, which could have made what they'd presented work and just went about it the wrong way, this movie was never going to have the kind of ending they were looking for without doing something drastic. The previous movies had just set the bar way too high, and maybe a bit unrealistically at that. But the point is, I will argue all day long that they made the wrong choice here, but I also understand why they did it. After all, what else could have hit the audience that hard? There's only the little fact that Woody would have never done that in a million years, and thus it isn't appropriate for that reason alone. But in this case, if they wanted to have a more appropriate ending that still packed an emotional punch, they would have had to have majorly rewritten the script, as they'd pretty much written themselves into a corner as far as options went for an emotional ending with the movie as presented. And for one final example of this, there's Onward. And the thing is, it's endings like this that make me insist that Pixar doesn't make their movies for children anymore. I mean, this is allegedly supposed to be a kid's movie. Let the boy meet his stupid father, for crying out loud. Because I guarantee you that a scene of Ian getting to meet him before he disappears could have been just as emotional and fulfilling as the ending we got, and perhaps even more so. And once again, I get it. The whole point of the ending is that Ian has come to see that Barley is the father he never had, and thus doesn't need to meet his father because he already has one. But at the same time, he could have learned this and also gotten to meet him at the same time. I mean, do you know how the waterworks would have been flying if Ian had gotten to say something like, "And don't worry about me, Dad. Barley will take it from here." Or something of that nature? Seriously, there was so much potential with this ending, and they threw it completely off base. Because unlike Cars 3, you don't even need to change anything to even achieve a more fulfilling ending. Now, why they chose to go with the ending they did, that I'm not 100% sure of. Maybe they were just that committed to the theme and moral of the movie and missed what I had pointed out, or maybe they just wanted to surprise the audience, or they could have thought that was honestly the most fulfilling ending possible, or possibly that they genuinely just couldn't think of anything better. But regardless of the reason, the point is that they had a potentially perfect ending on their hands and they didn't go with it. And as I just said before, how a movie ends can be just as important as the ending in the first place. And they had all of the components to make this possibly one of the most emotional, bittersweet endings in Pixar history. It was all right there and they didn't see it. Okay, so hopefully these examples can give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. Because obviously Pixar has had many perfect endings on their hands, too many to count as a matter of fact. But when they struggle to come up with a fulfilling one, it shows. I think the only time they struggled with an ending and it turned out well was in Soul. They had a couple of different versions of the ending, but they couldn't think of anything that worked. So they opted to have Joel be saved from the great beyond and then just end it there. And that was the perfect ending for a movie like that. It didn't need to answer the unanswered questions that ending left. That was the perfect way to end it. Because what's also important to remember here is, because Pixar is so famous for their emotional endings, these writers obviously feel a lot of pressure to deliver something that'll be seen as at least on par with what the company is known for, and thus might make risky decisions or go with endings they wouldn't have otherwise because of that. But as Cars 3 and Toy Story 4 both prove, if a script is very well written, the ending will fit in perfectly and be an emotionally fulfilling one all on its own. So the fact that these writers decided to fool around with and change the ending without going over the rest of the script might just tell you why those movies ended up so divisive among their fans, and especially the endings. Because if they had been the logical endings to the stories being told, like in Soul, then I guarantee you the fans would have been much more universal in their praise towards them. Okay, I think that's everything I've got. So now I'd like to hear from all of you. Do you believe that Pixar has suffered something of an ending problem with some of their movies, and that this mainly comes down to them overthinking how to make them emotionally fulfilling? Or do you believe that none of this is an issue and that I'm wrong? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Because just like always, you are allowed to have any opinion you want on this subject, and nobody can tell you that you're wrong for feeling the way you do. And thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.